Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Ryan Pronzinski of Christ Lutheran Church in Michigan Center, Michigan, and this is my Chair Chat Daily Devotion for Friday, May 15, 2020. Peace be with you. These Chair Chat Daily Devotions are intended to help you engage your life of faith during this time of pandemic, so I encourage you then throughout these videos to pause and reflect, journal, have conversation with those around you, and I also encourage you to leave constructive comments, questions, and prayer requests in the comments section below. The readings that are selected each day for these videos come from the Daily Revised Common Lectionary, which is a church calendar reading schedule, and it can be found online. The readings for today are Psalm 66, verses 8 through 20. Please see May 14 for details on that. Genesis 7, 1 through 24, which is a continuation from May 14's readings yesterday, and Acts 27, verses 13 through 38, which is also a continuation from readings yesterday on May 14. These readings can be found in the description below. Before I get to the readings, as always, I'd like to invite you all who are watching these to come and join us at Christ Lutheran Church for our Sunday morning worship service, which we have been live streaming with Facebook Live. So if you can come and join us at 9:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time and worship with us, we would love to have you. If you cannot join us for that specific time, you can always watch the worship service afterward, and we would love to have you join us in that way too. The link to those videos is in the description below. All right, with that being said, we have our first reading from Genesis chapter 7, verses 1 through 24, which reads as follows. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and its mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and its mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the air also, male and female, to keep their kind alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground." And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came on the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and everything that creeps on the ground, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. The rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day Noah was with his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons entered the ark. They and every wild animal of every kind, and all domestic animals of every kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every bird of every kind, every bird, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God commanded him. And the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters swelled and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. The waters swelled so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters swelled above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep, and all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, domestic animals, wild animals, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all human beings. Everything on dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, human beings and animals and creeping things and birds of the air. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those that were with him in the ark. And the waters swelled on the earth for 150 days. Here ends the reading. Now, I must admit that I started reading this reading and I got through it, and that was probably about 2 hours ago. And I spent a good hour or an hour and a half just kicking this story around in my head and my heart. Because once again, as I said yesterday, this story is very hard. I have no idea how we make this a children's story and make it this beautiful thing, because quite frankly, it's full of a lot of disturbing imagery and things going on. Yeah. So again, I want to start by saying that this story is hard. It is a hard story. And if you would like additional resources on the story of Noah and what other scholars and people have researched that know more about this topic in Hebrew and culture and history, please let me know, and I will work diligently in getting those resources to you. As for this video, I want to focus on how this is a story. I emphasize that word, story. And we as human beings, we learn from story and narrative, right? More than anything else. This is common knowledge, or at least it should be. If you haven't heard that, it's true. But I'll just give you a simple example. It's why we read stories, bedtime stories, to our children instead of showing them pie charts and graphs and figures. Okay? Kids don't learn that way. They learn through story, just like adults do. That's why stories are far more captivating and memorable than somebody just showing you a slideshow of statistics. That will put you to sleep. And why I want to focus on this as story and not history, again, as story and not history, is that this seems like an impossible situation historically. Yes, I am a pastor. Yes, I just said that this story seems like an impossibility historically. I mean, here we go. This is my, millennial human, and it's not just because I'm a millennial. Like any rational human being at first glance would look at this story and go, really? And here's what I mean, right? How could the whole world full of living creatures fit on a boat? Now, no, I haven't been down to Kentucky or wherever where they have that huge ark display, right? But seriously, how could you even collect every single living creature on the entire planet? It's huge. The world is huge. The people of Israel hadn't even been to every corner of the earth. I mean, seriously, penguins from Antarctica, they're gonna get that on the ark? Really? Right? And how in the world could all living things have enough resources to survive for 150 days on a boat? 150 days? I mean, right now, in our economy, in our way of life, we're struggling to survive 60 to 90 days being cooped up. And we have way more resources than Noah would have. All right. So I hope you can hear my healthy skepticism, okay? I mean, I believe in the authority of Scripture, and I believe that it is inspired, and that's why I read it every day and share it with you, okay? I'm a pastor. I love God. God is revealed to us in the Bible. It's a good thing. But man, if we try and take this story historically and woodenly, oh boy, is it problematic. But I actually needed to think about that to get me going this morning. And this is how I've kind of landed on. We need to focus on this simply as story, as narrative, as something that's trying to teach us something about ourselves and about God. Okay, again, something that's a story that's trying to teach us something about God and ourselves. Because we all remember this story. That's the power of narrative. We can't forget that. A huge boat, every living creature, big flood that storms the earth. You ask anybody about the story of Noah, and probably half the people on this planet could tell you a little bit about it. It's memorable, right? And so, again, this is why I needed to digest this as story and not history, because it's just really problematic as history. Because the more I thought about the impossibility of the story, the more beautiful it became as story. The impossibility became the beautiful point if we look at it simply as story and try not to think about this as historical fact or wooden fact. Because this is what I mean. This is what we learn about God and ourselves in this story. God sees the world, that is you and I, and all of creation, through the seemingly impossible. I'm going to say that one more time. We learn in this story of Noah that God sees people like you and I, and all of the world, through the seemingly impossible. My healthy skepticism, I'm sure other people that hear this story go, boy, that seems really impossible. And then they go, oh, well, we've all felt like we've been in impossible situations before. Boy, this story is really great to know that God sees people like you and I and all of creation through the seemingly impossible. If story is intended to not necessarily be 100% historically accurate to teach us something important, then we do have a beautiful story today of God helping the world overcome a seemingly impossible situation. Boy, does that make this story more helpful today. Because we learn there is new life after corruption and death and a seemingly impossible, never-ending situation of solitude and uncertainty. Let me say that one more time. We hear in this story that there is new life after corruption, death, and a seemingly impossible, never-ending situation of solitude and uncertainty by the grace of God. Does that not sound a lot like today, right now, during this time of pandemic? A situation that is seemingly impossible and never-ending, full of solitude and uncertainty, full of corruption and death. And yet we have this story of Noah, that God sees God's people and all of creation through these types of situations. That is at the heart of this story, because it recognizes that in the world there can be massive amounts of death and frightening, awful, terrible things. And we get stuck in these, tomb-like situations where we're kind of all in it together and it seems impossible, like we'd never be able to make it through. And yet in the end, we do. We end up seeing a beautiful rainbow. We end up sending out a dove that brings back an olive branch, a symbol of peace that we still use today because the story is so powerful. So this is what I would have you take away from the story of Noah today, as we face our own seemingly impossible situation, full of corruption, death, solitude, and uncertainty. God will see you and I and the whole world through. That is who God is. That is what we learn in this story of Noah. All right, on to Acts chapter 27, verses 13 through 38, which reads as follows. When a moderate south wind began to blow, they thought they could achieve their purpose. So they weighed anchor and began to sail past Crete close to the shore. But soon a violent wind, called the northeaster, rushed down from Crete. Since the ship was caught and could not be turned head-on into the wind, we gave way to it and were driven. By running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were scarcely able to get the ship's boat under control. After hoisting it up, they took measures to undergird the ship. Then, fearing they would run on to Syrtis, They lowered the sea anchor and so were driven. We were being pounded by the storm so violently that on the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. And on the third day, with their own hands, they threw the ship's tackle overboard. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and no small tempest raged, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul then stood up among them and said, Men, you should have listened to me, and have not set sail from Crete, and thereby avoided this damage and loss. I urge you now to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For last night there stood by me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before the emperor, and indeed, God has granted safety to all those who are sailing with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we will have to run aground on some island. When the 14th night had come, as we were drifting across the Sea of Adria, about midnight the sailors suspected they were nearing land. So they took soundings and found 20 fathoms. A little farther on they took soundings again and found 15 fathoms. Fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. But when the sailors tried to escape from the ship and had lowered the boat into the sea on the pretext of putting out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the boat and set it adrift. Just before daybreak, Paul urged all of them to take some food, saying, Today is the 14th day that you have been in suspense and remaining without food, having eaten nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will help you survive. For none of you will lose a hair from your heads. After he had said this, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then all of them were encouraged and took food for themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. After they had satisfied their hunger, they lightened the ship again by throwing the wheat into the sea. Here ends the reading. So I can't help but think, after reading this story, after everything has been jettisoned, I mean everything, right? That story ends, the reading ends with them even throwing the wheat into the sea. Their gear, everything, cargo, all of it's been thrown into the water. That after everything has been jettisoned, we as people only have 2 things that remain: God and ourselves. Not like as individuals, but as people. Humanity and God. Those are the only 2 things that are left after everything else has been jettisoned. And that's how we come into the world, is it not? And that's how we leave the world. Each other and God. Everything else is just stuff. It's replaceable. It's non-essential to true life and love. We as people even say this, I love this phrase, that we can make up for lost time, even time itself, at least mentally. We are capable of saying it's replaceable. And all of this is true as long as we and God are still working together. So in this story, the boat that everyone is on, it feels very symbolic. Especially that last one, when they let the anchors down and some of the people, well, really all of it, all the boats, feel symbolic. And it feels symbolic of trusting our stuff or ourselves as individuals and not trusting God and working together as fellow human beings, right? Because there's that one group of people that are like, dude, we're taking a smaller boat and we're getting the heck out of Dodge because this big one's going down. And Paul's like, nah, man, we need to stay in this together, right? And then, of course, at the beginning of the story, before these verses today, they're trying to hold on to all their cargo, get it delivered, make their money, the boat owner and the captain, right? And by the end of the story, it's like there's only really two things that matter: each other and God. And as we lean into that truth and we love one another, that is how we survive. That's what happens in this story. And so after reading this story, I'm left wondering this, right? As we try and cling to boats, if you will, in a metaphorical sense, stuff, things, right? What boat might we need to abandon? Simply for a time, right? A new boat can be built. We can go sailing again at some point. What boat might need to be abandoned for a time? And again, I'm speaking metaphorically. In order for us to be unified and to be strengthened and to keep at the forefront that which matters most, which is one another and God. We might like certain boats right now, right? Sporting events, large social gatherings, traveling to different countries. I've done all of these things multiple times. They're really great. They're really nice boats. Might we need to just abandon them for some time? But I'm wondering, how we keep our relationships with one another and God at the forefront of our hearts and our minds as we abandon these boats. What does that look like? And keeping the relationships in God at the forefront instead of the boats that we're used to being on with the people that we love, right? Because oftentimes we do these things in order to connect with our family and our friends and meet new people, or even just to connect with creation. Going to Utah this past summer was awesome. How do we seek to both find, build, and sustain safe harbors, right, which is what Paul and company have to do during this, and how do we do it during our storm of pandemic, disease, and social distancing? Especially when so many people want to simply stay on the boats they know and ride out the storm, even if it costs them, and more importantly, other people, their lives. Because unlike an actual boat in a storm that one person can decide to get on and go do, even if it might be a little foolish, like the boat that we are on right now, and the choices we make don't simply affect ourselves. They affect, as I said yesterday, people on the completely other side of the world. That's how this all started. I've never even been to China, and yet now I am somehow inextricably connected to people in Wuhan, China, a place I've never even heard of before. Now, let me state, I don't have answers to these questions. This is simply what I wonder. And quite frankly, as I ask these questions, and maybe you even go, man, those are some really tough questions, Pastor. That is because these questions probably feel, and maybe even are, impossible questions to answer completely 100% satisfactorily, right? They feel like impossible questions, which, going back to Genesis, is why I'm thankful for the story of Noah today, where we are reminded that God sees us through the impossible to a place and a way of new life, just like Noah and company. So I end by saying, God bless you with the peace and the hope of this story. as you remember this truth about who God is for you today. That God will, in fact, deliver you through the seemingly impossible storm of this life right now to a place of new life. And with that, I say I will talk to you tomorrow.